West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, l'âge tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Donald Trump is facing setbacks in two cases. We have those stories, both of them later tonight. Well, we begin right now with the news in the new book by former Congresswoman Liz Cheney. As you just heard, she is out on book tour, but she's saying some pretty newsworthy and important things. A little context up front. You know Liz Cheney, but let's recall that she's a politician who emerged from the hard-right flank of the Bush-Cheney era. She rose to Republican Party leadership in the House, where she added some gravitas. She was the highest-ranking woman at one point in the GOP. Today, when you think about it, former Speaker McCarthy lost his post because of MAGA insurgents. Cheney lost her entire job and political career, at least as far as Congress is concerned, all because she stood up against Trump's coup. When it occurred in the days after, she was clear on the floor of the House and in the impeachment process that we cannot sit by and allow coups and attacks on democracy in this country. That was the baseline. That was it. That proved to be too much in the clash between the loser of the 2020 race and the MAGA fever in Republican districts. Following that fever, many party elites turned on Cheney. She went to co-chair the January 6th committee, which investigated that insurrection. She's now making headlines like this with the new book. She's speaking out in these interviews. I should mention she will join Rachel here on MSNBC in a few hours tonight and join Nicole tomorrow. And here was Cheney this morning on Trump's threat and her former colleagues in Congress.
People who say, well, if he's elected, it's not that dangerous because we have all of these checks and balances, don't fully understand the extent to which the Republicans in Congress today have been co-opted. One of the things that we see happening today is sort of a sleepwalking into dictatorship in the United States.
Dictatorship in the United States. That is a strong warning. To many, that word, that concept, that idea evokes something that is viewed as external to the U.S., of leaders somewhere else or in some other time, some other era. That habit of thinking is wrong. It's why there are entire books about how it can, quote, happen here, to push Americans to understand the threat and the way both democracies and dictatorships operate. It's why historians are now comparing what Donald Trump is saying in public on the campaign trail to dictators like Mussolini, when he dehumanizes our fellow citizens in this country as, quote, vermin who must be rooted out. And Cheney, who staked her career on this, is saying this threat is now here. And she is carefully and precisely warning how she views Donald Trump as a would-be dictator, like Mussolini or Mao, that if he does win next year, based on everything she's learned, and remember the high level of the Republican Party that she reached, she is now certain, based on the evidence, he would try to then stay in power forever.
Do you believe if Donald Trump were elected next year that he would try to stay in office beyond a second term? That he would never leave office?
There's no question.
You think he would try to stay in power forever?
Absolutely. I mean, he's already done it once. He's already attempted to seize power, and he was stopped, thankfully, and for the good of the nation and the republic. But he said he will do it again. He's expressed no remorse for what he did.
Everything you heard her say there is a public fact. It's not contested in the actual reality of people who follow facts and evidence. And so it matters that we are witnessing here a failed U.S. coup leader run for re-election without remorse, without taking any of it back, let alone yet facing real accountability. Now, obviously, historical comparisons can be debated, but Trump's embrace of dictators is well known, from Russia to China, a state which does not use democracy to organize itself. Trump actually backed the Chinese government's crushing of dissent. A new piece in the Times unearths his comments from 1990, how the then authoritarian Chinese government killed demonstrators in Tiananmen Square, hundreds of innocent students. Trump said that back then that the killings, which he was aware of, he said when the students poured into Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government was vicious, horrible, but they put it down with strength. And he then said something that he's, of course, repeated many times. Our country right now is perceived as weak, in contrast to what he called strength. Now, these new warnings about Trump are not confined to the political figures who may clash with him. You could bring this up at your, Christmas or holiday gatherings and have a Republican member of the family say, well, but Cheney and him are opponents now. And they did become opponents, but only because she opposed the coup. But you can widen beyond that and look at the independent reporting, which is tracing the signs that a second Trump term would be more radical with authoritarian tactics. The Times has a report on that, noting the forces which had contained his autocratic tendencies would be weaker. And that, America, is putting it mildly. Whether one likes Donald Trump's policies and politics or think his policies or what he did are worth the downsides, there's a whole right-wing movement to overturn Roe v. Wade that wanted that bargain, and they got their policy part. That's subjective. But it is not up for debate. It is not subjective that Donald Trump, as a fact, has opposed democracy and acted to overthrow it, to foment an insurrection, to stage a coup. Some of these facts occurred in very open public. Some were more hidden and exposed over time by independent accounts, by the probe Cheney and others led. Some of those plots, as we've shown you in these arrows, are now indicted and convicted. And we've tracked this for years now, this coup conspiracy. This is all documented. Whether or not Donald Trump is convicted of coup-related crimes in March is a legal question, but the coup attempts, which other people have already been convicted of, are already facts. A second Trump term would be a life term in his mind. And we have the documented efforts, we have the facts and the public perception that matter here. So Cheney's stance may matter for the real world fact that people may listen to her more than they listen to some other sources. And we're seeing signs of these wider warnings as the Republican primary voting begins next month. Here's a new big special from The Atlantic, which features many people speaking out, including another Bush-Cheney administration veteran, David Frum, arguing that Trump actually had a kind of a competence problem in his first term, where his own ignorance of the system mitigated what Frum calls his, quote, corruption and brutality. While in a second term, Trump would arrive with a better understanding of the system's vulnerabilities and more willing enablers in tow. Now, another Bush-Cheney official has also concluded that when you take it all together, Trump has basically dissolved the actual Republican Party.
I don't think there is a Republican Party. There is a cult around Donald Trump. They didn't adopt a platform in 2020, which meant they didn't set out what they stood for. It was whatever Donald Trump tells us we should stand for today, that's what we'll stand for. So it's not a party as we have known it.
Not a party, but a cult. Cults work on obedience, not through thought or debate. Modern authoritarian regimes also, they work off propaganda and conspiracy theories because the truth itself as an external reality you don't control is not how they work. They see truth and the belief in what is real or what is happening as one more tool of power to control things. Now, one more conservatively expert in this space, Robert Kagan, sounding the alarm that an American Trump dictatorship now looks increasingly inevitable. And where others see a cult, as I mentioned, he sees empire, specifically Quote, like Caesar, Trump wields a clout that transcends the laws and institutions of government with unswerving personal loyalty of his army of followers. Now, democracy and human rights are a long way from empires that rule peasants or slaves. And while there are now some comedic takes online about how much people think about the Roman Empire these days, it is dead serious. The notion of an actual Trump-led wannabe empire is the end of democracy, which sounds like a bad thing unless, by the way, you're part of this sort of half-trolling, half-serious right-wing online community where some now push what they literally call red Caesarism as a kind of a code, envisioning Trump as a new Caesar to deal with the collapse of the United States. Now, in that conspiracy theory, collapse is just another doomsday word which assumes the end of democracy that they actually want to enact, just as they went, some of them, to storm the Capitol, just as some of them are now in prison for that. Collapse is a passive word. Overthrowing the government is an active one, and that's what they, of course, some of them are convicted of already having done. Now, one place that Trump did fail in all this in office was trying to get generals of the military to join his illegal plans. But he's trying to build more support for that right now as well, discussing what sound like illegal efforts to hijack existing federal law as a way to justify using the military to crush domestic unrest. Trump also has openly called for the murder or assassination of one of the generals he opposes. He wants to put more loyalists in government to enact the plans, including prosecuting opponents. All of this matters. And all of this is a part of what we're headed for next year. And if you feel exhausted or more ready for the holidays, or would rather watch something else or read something else or think about something else, I get that. But they are counting on that and a lot more in order to get where they want to go. And believe me, vigilance, engagement, civic participation is not only a duty of being in a democracy, but also really, if you want to look at it this way, a small price to pay for avoiding what might come. Where do we go from here? These are ancient atavistic problems for any society that seeks to be governed by something more than corrupt and oppressive mob rule. The singer Frank Ocean boiled this down once to its essence. Human beings in a mob. What's a mob to a king? What's a king to a god? And what's a god to a non-believer who doesn't believe in anything? America is quite literally facing a mob that wants a king, with a king who wants to be a kind of god, with a mob that doesn't believe in facts or anything other than getting its way. That was dangerous in Rome. It's dangerous if you face that kind of non-believer in the Colosseum. And from what we can tell on the evidence with no deliberate alarmism, it is dangerous right now. And if you don't believe it when you hear it documented or in independent accounts, would you believe it when you hear so many of the Republican Party's former members and allies making this very specific warning about the red alert of red Caesarism? Their term, their admission.
It is Tuesday, the 5th of December of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A small scant dash, a mere pinch of hot smoked Hungarian paprika will make all the difference in the world. It always has, and it always will. Hey, so I had passed on earlier in David's show a little news story about Eamon Bundy, who has gone on the lam. And I'll just give you a quick background on what that's about. He had taken part in a tete-a-tete with a hospital in Boise when he took up advocacy for a family whose child, an extended family, whose child had been taken in a welfare of the child incident in which the kid was malnourished and scabies and, just really sick. And it was obvious that they were the people responsible were not being responsible. So they took the kid to the hospital and, put him on an IV and, tried, well, they did, bring him back to a more healthy condition. Well, that was too much for this family. And so with Eamon Bundy's help, they tried to take over this hospital. And when I say take over the hospital, I mean an armed takeover. And that's what Bundy is known for. And also in the process, harassed the local police chief, individual hospital staff. When I say harassed, I mean going to their houses in the middle of the night with scores and scores of armed dissidents. What are they? Terrorists? With bullhorns and Klieg lights. Unbelievable. So, in the midst of all this, the hospital had sued Bundy for defamation. I can't quite remember exactly what it was that he said that maybe they were, child-eating Democrats, drinking baby blood, that kind of stuff. And the hospital sued him for defamation, and he lost and owed, quite a bit of money, $7 million, or I think actually more than that, considerable amount. Regardless, meant that he's going to have to give up some properties. And apparently he was making quite a bit of money off the websites that he holds as well, because I don't know, grift all these people, and it's like a closed circle. Grift. They come back and do a little bit of stuff, and then they keep grifting, making big time money. So rather than go to a contempt of court hearing that he had been charged with, that was, I believe, due today or tomorrow, he skipped town. Can't be found. So now he's under another contempt of court charge. Okay. But the hospital and others involved had said, look, take us home. We don't need him here, do we? I don't know. Do they? I just don't know. So that's what that's all about. And, we hate Eamon Bundy because, well, isn't it obvious? What terrible neighbors. Also, just as a reminder, he did come to prominence because his parents wouldn't pay the grazing fees for the cattle that they were starving and not giving enough water to. The Bundys were terrible neighbors. All the people in that area who paid their grazing fees, who kept their animals healthy, looked at the Bundys and said, what the hell? These are scourges. So rather than change their ways, the Bundys decided to become armed dissidents. For hire, apparently. Because, or maybe it's more true that they just imposed themselves upon, whatever event there was, and look where they are now. If they'd paid their grazing fees, they wouldn't be where they are now. Isn't that true? See? Can't have government. Okay. I guess it's okay for, people, they have a Second Amendment right and a First Amendment right to take over the United States of America. Give me a break. Oh, gosh. Okay. I wish I could talk about the college conference realignment, but I'm not going to. I have no idea what the hell they're doing. I did mention that, there's plenty of black and white movies from the history of cinema where Michigan is playing USC or UCLA in the Rose Bowl. That used to be the biggest bowl until, actually, the conferences decided that's going to be the Orange Bowl or whatever it is. Now they have like the college championship game. The Rose Bowl is the pinnacle of them all. I am sorry. I'm old school that way. So people are not going to understand any of these movies about USC or UCLA playing Michigan in the Rose Bowl and what that meant as society. I mean, Michigan being somewhat in the Midwest because it was. And coming out to the bright city lights of Pasadena. People will have no idea what that meant. Okay. Destroy our history at our peril. God. All right. So, what else is going on? Clueless Trump attorneys screw up asking for an expedited appeal. I love that. Alina Habba might have been good as a parking garage lawyer. What do they do? Collect from people who didn't pay their parking fees? That's rough. So in other words, she's a cute leg breaker. Doesn't seem to work when trying to file these expedited hearings so that you can lift a gag order before the guy goes to trial. They'll rule on the gag order after he's gone to trial. In the meantime, keep him shut up. I wish. Jeez. Now he's out there complaining that I guess the Lincoln Project has put out a ad that he's taken exception to, and he's trying to tell everybody that's all AI generated to make me look bad. You don't need to do any AI generation to make you look bad. What you're doing already with the weird bronzer. And what the hell is that comb over, that wispy comb over? What are they doing with that? Yeah, tell me about fake news. Jeez. Okay. So, I would like to make a constitutional amendment, a rule, a bylaw, something, a provision, that there's a level of vanity and ego that's, should be allowed to be president of the United States. I just think so. I think maybe they should have to take an empathy test. That would be nice. Because now, if you do possess empathy, like Joe, you'll be accused of genocide. Kamala is over in, I guess, maybe she's back. And she's been over there brokering a Mid-East peace deal and a Gaza drawdown, because you can't have one without the other. Made very clear what our policy is, and it's not the mass elimination of Gazans. Where they come up with that, well, Did they call what Pol Pot did a Holocaust? A genocide? Do they? What happened to this in Syria? What's happening in Ukraine? Yep. Okay. Paid by the same people who are out there saying there's no science, to replace fossil fuels. That's what happened at the COP28. Thanks. Yeah. Is that true? He had to actually walk that back a little bit. He said, oh, yeah, I actually believe in science. But, you got an oil-based country leading the COP28. You're going to come up with that kind of stuff. Yeah, we're not getting rid of our fossil fuels. We're going to get the last drop from the last whale if it kills us. And it almost did. And it looks like it will if we don't stop. But we all know that. Okay, what do we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe as we begin on this Tarrytown Chowder Tuesday? I couldn't pass up, analysis of what Liz Cheney, told Rachel and a few others and what her book has exposed. But I want to remind folks, Liz Cheney is not our girlfriend, okay? She's not. On the rest of the menu, Clark County, Washington is ordered to pay almost $2 million in a racial discrimination case. Yeah, it happens. The new Republican-drawn North Carolina congressional districts are challenged in federal court on racial bias claims. And a prosecutor in Texas has dropped charges against 17 Austin police over their tactics used during the 2020 George Floyd protests and is asking the Justice Department to investigate instead. It's not as bad as you might think. After the break, we move to the chef's table where one of Hong Kong's best-known pro-democracy activists has jumped bail and moved to Canada. And a Madrid judge has opened an investigation into several agents of Spain's National Intelligence Center for passing secret information to the United States. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. The page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link that just happens to be near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, that would really help us pay our bills and all the other costs that are accrued while running this powerhouse of resistance. If you could afford to send us what you might spend on, I don't know, how about an espresso-type coffee drink? If you could send us those funds once a month, it really does help us pay those, well, put a big dent in paying those bills and all the costs accrued running this powerhouse of resistance. And we have some success at it, because we've been able to pay our bills and fly under the radar. And we have found that when you pay your bills, unlike the Republicans, apparently, who think it's a crime to pay your bills, we have been able to get away with it and get away with a lot. So we figure if we just keep paying our bills, it seems to work. So thank you for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty, I'll get it out, as the founders originally intended so many years ago. Okay, it's only Tuesday. Alrighty, if you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Facebook, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Let's see, you can follow me on those social media platforms as well, including Tumblr and what else? Instagram. Wow. But you can find me mostly anywhere online at Justice Putnam or simply Justice Putnam. You can find me that way too. I post the show notes and links diary, incidentally, on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. I just put it in queue, put the parameters on, comes up. And the reason I do that is because the links to the actual articles are in those show notes and links diaries. And I would suggest reading the actual articles by the actual reporters, because sometimes they're quite serious, even though we might take them in jest. Well, just a little. That's right. Now, you can also follow the show on Twitter. It's just a placeholder. Yeah, a placeholder. And you can do that anyway at Cookbook West. I continue to promise I'll make it a more active account on these other platforms real soon. I promise. Also, if you could, please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. Really, wherever podcasts can be found, you're just never going to find them on Stitcher. You can't. Have over a decade, almost a dozen years. And now you can't. Okay. It's not their fault, but it's just the way it is. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by the website of the Oregon Public Broadcasting Group, and it is by Troy Bernelson. Okay. Now, Clark County recently took another costly hit in federal court. That's in Washington State, by the way. The U.S. District Judge on Friday ordered the county to pay more than $1.3 million in attorney's fees and other expenses to 3 Latino employees. And that's in addition to the $600,000 that the jury awarded the trio in June. That jury's finding over the summer effectively ordered Clark County to pay for the employees' attorneys as well. The judge retained discretion in tallying the payment after a review of hours worked and other financial specifics. County attorneys argued the plaintiff's legal team should receive a payout closer to $600,000, according to the federal judge's recent order. In detailing his order to pay $1.3 million, U.S. District Court Judge David Estudillo wrote that the plaintiff's attorneys were reasonably entitled to about $982,000 plus an extra 1/3 for the risk of the case. Estudillo noted the case rested primarily on the testimony of the 3 workers, Ray Alanis, Isaiah Hudson, and Elias Pena. Jurors largely weighed their testimony against numerous witnesses called on behalf of the county. The federal judge also said the attorneys, led by the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, also known as MADLEF, spearheaded the case on a contingent basis. Now, we know that lawyers working on contingency may not get paid at all if the case flounders. The likelihood of success at the outset was highly uncertain, the judge wrote in his order. To Luis Lozada, a staff attorney for MALDEF, the judge's decision to bump the award by 1/3 underscored the difficulty of the case. It shows civil rights violations should be taken seriously, Lozada said. More attorneys should take on these cases, and hopefully more plaintiffs come forward for attorneys to take on these cases. Between the settlements for the trio and the attorney's fees, the county is now liable for roughly $2 million. The county has also been paying Seattle firm Keating, Buckland, and McCormick for its defense. Wow, you paid a lot. The 3 men accused county officials of ignoring their complaints about their experiences at work. Alanis, Hudson, and Pena argued in court that they had been confronted with racist remarks for years. The 3 work in the county department responsible for maintaining roads, parks, and other public projects. They reported colleagues and direct supervisors called them Manuel labor and the Brown crew. One co-worker reportedly told them that they worked for a white slave master. And one co-worker, who was later promoted, said he was building a border wall around the public works facility. Jurors found at least some of the men's claims were credible. The jury said the county did not violate federal civil rights laws, but did break anti-discrimination laws in Washington State. Gary D. Robertson of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. North Carolina Black and Latino voters sued in federal court on Monday yesterday, seeking to strike down congressional districts drawn this fall by Republican state legislators that they argue weaken minority voting power in violation of the U.S. Constitution. The lawsuit filed in the U.S. District Court in central North Carolina challenges 4 districts where the plaintiffs contend GOP leaders in charge of the General Assembly moved around groups of voters and minimized the voting strength of minorities, thereby strengthening the state's white majority. They also want a new map adopted. The map, enacted in October, puts Republicans in good shape to win at least 10 of the state's 14 congressional seats next November. Under the iteration of the congressional map that had been drawn by state judges for the 2022 elections, Democrats and Republicans each won 7 seats. The shift could help Republicans on Capitol Hill retain control of the U.S. House. North Carolina's minority populations have long suffered from voting discrimination and vote dilution, and as a result have endured persistent disparities in political representation, the lawsuit reads, adding that the state's newly enacted congressional redistricting plan exacerbates these issues. Webster and Jim Vertuno of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Texas prosecutor whose office oversaw indictments against more than 20 Austin police officers for tactics used during the 2020 protests that followed George Floyd's killing said yesterday, Monday, he was dropping most of the cases and would ask the Justice Department to investigate instead. The announcement is a sharp reversal for Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza, a progressive who was elected months after the protests and ran on promises to hold police accountable in the Texas Capitol. Garza, a Democrat, said his office would dismiss indictments against 17 officers, but still move forward with prosecuting 4 others. The slate of felony charges were by far the most indictments of officers from a single U.S. police department following nationwide protests in 2020 over racial injustice and police brutality. Some Austin police officers fired beanbag rounds in the crowd, critically injuring a teenager. This has been a difficult chapter for Austin, and I look forward to turning the page. These announcements will allow police officers whose lives were upended by the indictments to return to their services to our community, said Austin Mayor Kirk Watson, a Democrat who was not in office at the time of the protests. In a statement, Garza did not explain why he was deciding now to drop most of the cases. Many of the officers were indicted in February of 2022. None had gone to trial, and Republican Governor Greg Abbott had floated the idea of pardons after the charges were handed down by a grand jury. Garza said his office would continue to hold law enforcement who break the law accountable. In a letter to the Justice Department, Garza asked prosecutors to review Austin police's use of force for crowd control during the protests. Ken Irvin, an attorney who represents 9 officers whose charges will be dismissed, called the indictments a combination of politics and incompetence. Mr. Garza has not really taken the chance to educate himself on police tactics, Irvin said. Maybe he's finally done that. Really? Despite widespread claims of heavy-handed or even illegal police tactics across the U.S. following the 2020 protests, few cities pursued charges. 2 Dallas officers faced charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and official oppression, and a New York police officer was charged with assault after shoving a woman to the ground. In October, a former Minneapolis police officer was sentenced to 15 days in the county workhouse with eligibility for electronic home monitoring after pleading guilty to assaulting a black man during the unrest that followed Floyd's murder. And the city of Houston has paid out more than $18 million to settle lawsuits brought by protesters injured during the protests, including a college student who suffered brain damage after an officer shot him with a beanbag round. 8 other lawsuits are still pending, according to the city. Well, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to A Cup of Health with CDC, a weekly feature of the MMWR, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Gaines. Even if you are a safe, experienced driver, accidents can happen at any time. Young children are especially at risk for injury and death in a motor vehicle crash. Dr. Erin Sauber-Schatz is a researcher with CDC's National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. She's joining us today to discuss the importance of keeping children properly restrained in motor vehicles. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you.
Erin, how many children are killed or injured each year in a motor vehicle crash in the U.S.?
In 2013, 638 children aged 12 and under died in a crash, and over 127,000 were injured.
How effective have child safety seats and other safety devices been in preventing injuries and death among children?
Car seats and booster seats are very effective at preventing injury and death in a crash, but the most effective seat is the one that parents use to buckle their kids on every drive.
Where's the safest place for children to ride in a car?
The back seat is the safest place for children to ride in a car, buckled in an age and size-appropriate car seat, booster seat, or seatbelt.
How long should a child ride in a safety seat?
Children should use a car seat until they're at least 5 years old, and a booster seat until the adult seatbelt fits properly. The adult seatbelt fits properly when the lap belt lays across the upper thighs, not the stomach, and the shoulder belt lays across the shoulder, not the neck.
Erin, where should parents go in their community to get help installing and using car seats?
Parents can get one-on-one help free of charge from a certified child passenger safety technician. You can find a tech near you at cert.safekids.org and click on Find a Tech. Another option is to check with your local police or fire department.
Aaron, where can listeners get more information about restraining children properly in motor vehicles?
Listeners can go to cdc.gov and type in the search box, Child Passenger Safety.
Thanks, Aaron. I've been talking today with CDC's Dr. Aaron Sauber-Schatz about the importance of keeping kids safe in a motor vehicle. Remember, for children under the age of 13, properly restrain them in the back seat. If you're unsure about how to install or use car seats, check with your local police or fire department. Until next time, be well. This is Dr. Robert Gaines for A Cup of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. It doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. Just days before the November 2023 election, the chair of the Shasta County, California Board of Supervisors was threatening to defy a new California law and hand count ballots instead of using an electronic ballot tabulator. The county supervisors blinked. Shasta County has over 111,000 registered voters, but as we've reported, county supervisors severed the county's contract with Dominion Voting Systems. The county's registrar of voters estimated that a manual count would require almost 87,000 hours by over 1,200 election workers at a cost of $1.65 million. Hand counting is considered less accurate and more expensive by election experts. Cal Matters reports that on October 4th, Governor Gavin Newsom signed a bill that restricts hand counting to limited situations and prohibits manual counts in elections larger than 1,000 registered voters or 5,000 for special elections. After Board Chair Patrick Henry Jones reportedly suggested the county would not follow the new law, the California Secretary of State issued a warning making clear the state would take action if it didn't. The state sent monitors to ensure compliance, and the election was conducted with no issues, using new tabulators at a cost of $950,000. Other hand count challenges by election deniers persisted in recent weeks in New Hampshire, Arizona, Georgia, and Florida. We have more on hand counting at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1955. That was the day the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations merged to become the AFL-CIO. The American Federation of Labor was a confederation of unions that can trace its roots all the way back to just after the Civil War in 1866. Samuel Gompers initially established the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions, which reorganized as the American Federation of Labor. This group was comprised of craft unions and represented primarily skilled laborers. However, as industrialization grew, many union organizers believed in the idea of industrial unions. They wanted to expand to organize more unskilled workers by industry. John L. Lewis, head of the United Mine Workers Union, was one union leader who wanted this change. Out of this idea, the Committee of Industrial Unions was formed as part of the American Federation of Labor. This group felt its issues were being ignored by the AFL. As a result, in 1938, it split from the AFL and became the Congress of Industrial Organizations. Members of the CIO included the United Mine Workers, the United Auto Workers, and the United Steel Workers. The 1950s were a high point for labor unions in the United States. 1/3 of all workers in the nation were members of unions. However, both the AFL and the CIO were concerned about the future of organized labor. The Taft-Hartley Act, passed in 1947 over the veto of President Harry S. Truman, made organizing more difficult. The two groups realized they would be more effective if they banded together under one roof. The American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations merged to become today's AFL-CIO.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 52 degrees Fahrenheit under mostly cloudy conditions. Rain showers should begin in just a little bit and continue throughout the day. And we should have winds light and variable and something less than a quarter inch throughout the daytime hours. Then mostly cloudy with some showers after midnight tonight. Lows in the upper 40s, so a bit chillier than what we've had. And winds will remain light and variable. Then periods of rain tomorrow. Winds light and variable. And we're looking at about 3/4 of an inch of rain throughout tomorrow. So, okay, we'll look forward to that, won't we? The pollen rating is at none here in our little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 13 parts per million. And the daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.11 inches. Visibility is down to 5 miles. And relative humidity is at 98%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 44 degrees with rain showers. Paris is 46 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 55 and clear, though they are under a thunderstorm watch. Bagram is 42 degrees and clear. Kyiv is 26 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 68 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 48 degrees with rain. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 60 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees with fog, and they are under a heavy and dense fog advisory. Chicago, Illinois is 38 degrees and cloudy. And New York, New York is 44 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Candice Leong of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. One of Hong Kong's best-known pro-democracy activists who moved to Canada to pursue her studies said she would not return to the city to meet her bail conditions becoming just the latest politician to flee Hong Kong under Beijing's crackdown on dissidents. Agnes Chow, a famous young face in the city's once vibrant pro-democracy movement, was arrested in 2020 under a Beijing-imposed national security law that was enacted following 2019 anti-government protests. She was released on bail, but also served more than 6 months in jail in a separate case over her role in the protests. After Chow was released from prison in 2021, she had to regularly report to the police. She said in an Instagram post on Sunday night that the pressure caused her mental illnesses and influenced her decision not to return to the city. Many of her peers have been jailed, arrested, forced into self-exile, or silenced after the introduction of the security law in 2020. The suppression of the city's pro-democracy movement highlights that freedoms promised to the former British colony when it returned to China in 1997 have been eroded drastically. Both Beijing and Hong Kong governments have hailed the security law for bringing back stability to the semi-autonomous Chinese city. Chow said the authorities in July offered to return her passport so she could pursue studies in Canada under the condition that she traveled to mainland China with them. She agreed, she said, and her trip in August included a visit to an exhibition on China's achievements and the headquarters of tech giant Tencent. The authorities later returned her passport. After considering the situation in Hong Kong, her safety, and her health, Chow said she probably won't return to the city again.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. A Madrid judge has opened an investigation into several agents of Spain's National Intelligence Center for an alleged leak of secret information to the United States, the country's defense minister said yesterday, Monday, confirming a report in Spanish digital newspaper El Confidencial. Spanish Defense Minister Margarita Robles said the Intelligence Center itself had filed a complaint with the court. Robles, who was visiting a military base in Latvia, declined to give any further details. Spanish daily newspaper El País reported that 2 agents were arrested recently in connection with the case. The Associated Press could not immediately confirm the information. Well, we'll keep our eye on that, won't we? And that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tombe, nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin l'âge tombe, nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.